So my name is Larson. I wanted to talk about relational conflict today. Relational conflict can be one of the most difficult and confusing things we face in life, as well as some of the most painful. And that pain that's involved with that can really cloud our judgment sometimes and make it difficult to know what to do in situations. So let's say a family member or a friend hurts you. They betray you in a big way. And you walk through, let's say you've already walked through forgiving and blessing them, but what do you do next? How do you handle that situation? You're left with a wound, you're left with a bleeding heart, you're left with broken trust and confusion about, like, how do I proceed with this person? Because I don't feel safe with them right now. So what's the right thing to do in that situation, right? We want a formula. We want it black and white. Sorry. Okay. But I want to discuss, first of all, I'm going to discuss some high-level definitions, and then we'll kind of go into three questions that you can process with the Lord to really help you recognize what is the right next step in that relationship. How should I handle this after I've forgiven? So just some high-level definitions. First of all, forgiveness. As much as we talk about it as Christians, like we need to forgive, yeah, forgiveness is important, oh, I've forgiven them, I think we often don't talk about the practicals of how to do it, and I think we do people a disservice because we just say, oh, you need to forgive. Okay, well, how do you do that? What does that look like? How do you do that process? When do you know if you're done? What happens if those emotions come back? Have you really forgiven? Like, these are really important questions to answer for people, and I don't think we talk about it enough. I have a talk on my YouTube channel called Forgiveness, Why and How, where I go really in detail on this. So I'm not going to go too deep on it right now. A quick summary is that forgiveness is absolutely essential to close the door to the door to the enemy and kick him out. And forgive and bless is a tool that I use to walk people through this process that kind of puts it into a little bit of a formula to help people remember and be able to walk through it. It gives them just something practical to grab onto while they're walking through this process. So I'm just going to briefly run through that. It's on your paper in front of you. But I choose to forgive this person for, and then you list off everything you need to forgive that the Lord brings to mind. And because it made me feel, so we're honest about how it made us feel and what it did in our heart or in our life. And then we just keep asking, Lord, we keep doing that loop. And is there anything else, Jesus? Is there anything else, Jesus? Until you're blank after you ask that question. And then we continue with blessing. I choose to bless them with, and we bless them with extravagant blessings like we would want someone to pray over us. And then at the end, we just wrap it up with, I hand Jesus the responsibility for justice, and I release mercy over them. Okay? So that's just a quick overview of a prayer that I lead people through to walk through that process of forgiveness. Now, the other person that you're forgiving, they could be dead. They could be no longer in contact with you, or you have no idea of how to be in contact with them, and you still need to forgive them because forgiveness only takes one, right? It takes one person to forgive. And just a couple things, true forgiveness is not, this was really summarized well by my pastor, Dave Johnson. True forgiveness is not approving of what they did. It's not excusing what they did. It's not justifying it. It's not pardoning it. It's not denying it or forgetting what they did. It's not pretending what they did didn't hurt you. And most importantly, it's not reconciliation. Forgiveness and reconciliation are two very, very different things. So what is reconciliation then? Let's talk about that. Reconciliation takes two people actively involved, willing to own what they have done and apologize, and willing to work towards repairing the damage done in the relationship through willingness to change, grow, and heal. Okay? It's much more involved. And it takes both people being willing to do that. So there's many times where you might even want to reconcile. You might think reconciliation is the right thing to do. But if the other person isn't willing and of their own free will is not willing to step into that process with you, you can't force it. You can't make somebody reconcile with you. I mean, you could try, but that'd be really unhealthy, right? So many times, though, people confuse those two. And they think that if I forgive this person, I have to reconcile with them. And then what happens is they don't want to forgive because maybe they recognize it would not be good for me to reconcile with this person. Let's say they're toxic, they're unhealthy, they're abusive, whatever. And so then they're resisting the idea of forgiveness because they think it means they have to be in relationship with this person again. So we really need to do a better job of differentiating that for people, that these are two really different things, to help them walk into forgiveness, because that's a lie that keeps people stuck in unforgiveness. Which leads us to talking about healthy boundaries. Danny Silk, in his book, Keep Your Love On, lays this out really well. I highly recommend that book if you haven't read it. I recommend it to pretty much all my clients. It's just like, it's so, so good. But he lays this out well as he talks about levels of access. You don't invite the UPS man into your door, and you definitely don't invite him into your bedroom, right? But if your best friend comes over, they're immediately invited into your kitchen. And if your spouse comes in, they have full reign of the house, your life, like everything, right? And so we have these levels of access within our relationships on earth. And Jesus even had this. John was his closest disciple and kind of his closest friend. Just ask John, okay? The beloved disciple. Peter, James, and John were his closest circle. He would often be like, okay, you three come with me. So he gave them more access than he gave the rest of the 12. Then he had the 12 disciples that were his closest group. Then he had the 72. He had the crowds that loved him, like when he did stuff for them, right? And then he had the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Romans and the enemies that hated him. So there's these levels and these circles of influence, these circles of access. And so a huge thing that you have to recognize in relationships is that you're a powerful person. And you have total authority over what level of access you give to any person in your life, even family. You're not powerless, you're not helpless in any situation or relationship. And this keeps you in the proper mindset of owning the level of access that you're giving that person. And you might say, well, I have to be in relationship with this person. They're my mom, they're my cousin, they're my best friend, they're my spouse. No, you don't. Lots of people have severed relationships like that. I'm not saying you should, but I'm saying you need to own the fact that you are actually choosing to stay in relationship with that person. You are choosing to give them that level of access, okay? Does it get more difficult when it's family? 100%, yeah. Does it get more difficult if it's a spouse? Absolutely. But what I'm saying is you need to acknowledge that it's an option to sever it and that you are choosing not to, okay? You're choosing to stay in relationship with them. As a believer, this is why it's so important to stay connected to the Holy Spirit in these types of situations and checking with him about each situation and asking for his advice and wisdom. I think about in the Old Testament, they would have all these different kind of battles, right? And they would go to the Lord and go, how should we win this battle? And the Lord would give them a battle plan. And they were wildly different battle plans. Do you remember this, reading through the Old Testament? Wildly different. One time it's like, send the worship team up front. Another time it's like, break these jars and shout. Another time it's walk around this, city and be silent. Don't say anything, right? So he'd give these battle plans. A couple times in the Old Testament, they would try to take the battle plan from last time and apply it to the next time. And it would bomb horribly. They wouldn't go to the Lord. They wouldn't ask again. They would just be like, hey, this worked last time. Let's do it again. And they would try to formalize it. And it would bomb. And then they would go to the Lord and go, Lord, what happened? We did what you told us. He's like, no, that's what I told you to do last time. You didn't come and ask me what you should do this time. And the reason I think he does that is he wants us to stay close. He wants us to stay in really connected relationship where we continually are going to him. We're continually asking him, what do I do in this situation? Okay? Because it can be different every single time. So boundaries, I think, become a lot simpler when we start to think about them as levels of access, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. What level of access do I give this person? Now, boundaries are mostly gray. There's not a lot of black and white when it comes to boundaries. There are some good, healthy principles with boundaries, and Jesus can totally upend these at any time. Okay? Clear as mud? Okay. I had someone get really frustrated to me one time talking about boundaries and just wanted the black and white. Just give me the black and white of boundaries. And I was like, if there was black and white, a lot more people would be good at it, okay? There's a lot of gray in boundaries, and that's what's so hard about it. And it requires us to go to Jesus and really work through in each situation with each person, what do I do in this situation? What's the right thing to do here? So I want to give you these 3 good questions to walk through asking Jesus when you're in a situation like this and you need to process what the next steps should look like. So go back to this situation in your mind. So imagine a friend or family member has hurt you, betrayed you in a significant way, or even a small repeated way, right? Because that can really break things down too. You walk through forgiving and blessing them, but you're left with this wound. You're left with this hurt, and you don't know what to do and what the next steps should look like. So what's the right thing to do? Okay. So first of all, I want you to ask this question about, Jesus, am I still supposed to be in relationship with this person? It might even feel like a really no-duh question. Ask it anyway, because once you have that answer from the Lord, you're going to have more of a concrete foundation to walk forward on. You're not going to have that question in the back of your mind anymore because you're going to have an answer. So, Jesus, am I still supposed to be in relationship with this person? If the answer is yes, then it's like, okay, how do I go about repairing then, Jesus? And then the next 2 questions will be really helpful. If the answer is no, that he does not want you to be in relationship with this person anymore, then it's about, how do I go about ending this relationship well? What is the God-honoring way to do that with this person? What is God asking of me? Do I need to have a conversation? Is he asking me to go to this person and say, look, this has to change. I can't be connected anymore, or I can't, give you this level of access anymore. Do you need to have a really blatant conversation? Or is he just asking you to change something internally in yourself and just slowly back out and let the relationship fizzle out? Many relationships will just naturally fizzle out if you stop watering them. If you stop putting energy and time and calling that person and initiating, a lot of times they'll just naturally go away. And sometimes that's the right answer. It's just back out and don't put any more energy into it. Other relationships will need a very blatant conversation with boundaries to end them. If the other person is hanging on, or the situation is such that you need to make a direct change, or the Lord is asking you to have that conversation and be very blatant with them, okay? Second question to ask, what type of relationship is this realistically? Not what you would like it to be, but what is it actually? And then what do you want it to be? And then, is that realistic? Are they capable of what you want from them? Or are they not? And there's kind of different categories of relationship. This is kind of how I look at it. Is it a giving, receiving, or reciprocal relationship? So giving relationships, I kind of see it as like, I'm giving to this person. They are, let's say, kind of in a pit, whether it's emotionally, spiritually, physically. They're not on the same necessarily level health-wise as I am. So I'm trying to pull them up, right? So I'm giving in that relationship, mostly. Whether it's emotional, physical, or spiritual, I'm mostly giving. I'm basically mentoring in a way, okay? That's what mentoring is like. Or it's a receiving relationship where I'm the one kind of in the pit and I'm reaching up and saying, help me go higher. Help me emotionally, help me spiritually. And they are kind of doing the mentoring for me, and I'm mostly receiving from that person. Or there's the reciprocal where you're kind of on the same ground, health-wise, maybe life-wise, things like that. And so it's more of like a peer relationship. Doesn't have to be the same age, but more of a peer relationship. There's healthy giving and receiving happening in the relationship where both are receiving value from the relationship at different times. It may not be at the same time. I might be giving, and then they're giving, I'm receiving, right? But there's kind of this back and forth that's happening of reciprocity. This is most of our healthy relationships, is the reciprocity is happening. And then there's kind of this other category of like business relationships, where it's a professional relationship, perhaps even transactional, where maybe they're paying you for a service, you're paying them for a service, or you're a professional business connection, okay? It's kind of a little bit of a different category. So I've had many relationships start as where I'm giving and I'm kind of pulling them up. And then as they healed or grew and they were on the same level, it became a reciprocal relationship. Or I've had relationships where they're mentoring me, and then as I grew, it became more of a reciprocal relationship. Okay? So that can often happen. And you can do a couple, you can do a couple close giving relationships in your life. But if more of your relationships are giving in your life, you're going to tip over. You're going to get pulled into the pit. You're going to get pulled down. You're going to run out of energy because you can't pull that many people up if you don't have anybody hanging onto you and helping pull you up. So to be healthy, the vast majority of your relationships either need to be reciprocal or giving to you, and you can have a couple giving that are just 100% you're giving to them. They don't really have anything to give to you. Okay? So kind of think through your relationships with that, because you will dry up if you have too many relationships where you're giving and you don't have enough where you're receiving. And I encourage you to always ask the Lord before you take on a giving relationship. Is this person assigned to me? Am I assigned to this person? That's a really, really important question to ask. Because if you are assigned to them, no matter how much you're giving, you're going to have the grace for it. What you need is going to be there, no matter how difficult or taxing this relationship is on your life, you'll have what you need. If you are not assigned to this person that's 100% giving, it's going to dry you up so fast. Don't do it, okay? And so there isn't grace for things that he's assigned us to. Now, sometimes you won't realize. Maybe you walk into the relationship and you think it's reciprocal, and then after a little bit you realize, this is not. I am pretty much just giving, right? Or sometimes after like a hurt or a betrayal or a significant change in that person's life, the Lord will call us to switch what type of relationship category we have that person in our life. Like I said, maybe you thought it was a reciprocal relationship and all of a sudden you realize, nope, this is a giving relationship. Okay. Then have some time of prayer with the Lord and go, have you assigned me here? Am I supposed to stay in relationship with this person? Go back to the first question, right? And I've seen situations where an individual kind of walked away from the Lord, or they started walking into some interesting stuff spiritually. And I had to have some conversation with the Lord and switch the relationship in my mind. And adjusting my expectations like that helps me not to be judgmental, helps me not to be resentful. Okay? Because if I'm just going, I want this to be reciprocal, and it's so not, then I'm going to get really upset at that person. And if I keep myself in that place of expectation, this should be reciprocal, and it's not, then I'm going to get really angry with them, and I'm probably going to end the relationship anyway because I'm pissed off, right? Okay? But if I can switch that in my mind, have that conversation with the Lord, he's like, yes, you're assigned to this person, and I switch it to a giving relationship where I completely expect that it's going to be 100% me giving and not receiving, that resentment goes away because I no longer have that expectation, okay? It helps me to be a powerful person, to realize I'm choosing to be in relationship with this person with the input and wisdom from the Lord, and I'm still going to choose to stay in this relationship as it currently stands as a giving relationship, okay? Now, I usually do not have a conversation with somebody about this switch in my head, okay? I'm not like, you're giving only, right? Or something like that. Okay, that would be kind of not nice. I'm simply changing the category in my mind so that I'm not in a place of resentment, and I'm not open to things I shouldn't be open to. So let's say they've walked into being into more New Age or, whatever it might be. I can always be kind to everybody, but I'm not going to eat just anything somebody hands me, right? I'm going to sniff it first. If it smells rotten, I'm not going to eat it, okay? Love you, but no, okay? So if somebody is in that place, I'm going to switch it and be like, okay, I am not willing to receive from this person, barring the Lord telling me I should receive something from them. Okay, there's always that caveat. But I don't necessarily have to sever the relationship, okay? Maybe the Lord wants you in their life so that you can be a light, so that you can keep that bridge so they can have ask difficult questions that they might be going through as they're trying to figure stuff out in life. Does that make sense? Okay. But if the Lord says get out, then get out and remove yourself so that you're not getting pulled down into a pit where you're not supposed to be. The third question to ask is, what level of access should they have in this season? It's not forever, but what level of access should they have in this season? Again, as a believer, this is going to require wisdom from the Lord to figure out what level of access you should give after a broken trust or hurt. And there are great principles of what's normally wise, okay? But the Lord can totally bypass that. This is what's frustrating about boundaries sometimes. The Lord be like, yeah, that's normally what, everybody would tell you to do. I'm going to tell you to do this. It's like, that makes no sense. Okay? And so the Lord can bypass that and ask you to give more or less than what you would consider normally to be wise. And I think about in the New Testament when they're totally exhausted and the crowds are asking for so much, and the Lord says, nope, we're going to go off and we're going to go refresh. And he pulls them away from the crowds. Then they get to the other side of the lake, and the crowds show up, and he switches. And he goes, okay, I want you to give now. And they're like, we were going to go rest, Jesus. Like, send them away, okay? And the Lord's like, no, you feed them. You give them what they need. And they were completely exhausted, and the Lord gave them and empowered them with what they needed to continue giving, even though they were in that state of exhaustion. So that's the difficult thing with boundaries is sometimes you're in a place of total exhaustion. It would make total sense to say no, and the Lord will say yes, and I'll empower you. And then there's other times where you're like, here's a need. I can meet it. I have the energy for it. And the Lord says, no, I didn't call you to meet that need. No, don't do it. And I think about when they asked him to come and heal Lazarus, and he waited 3 days. He essentially said no for 3 days because the Lord told him, no, don't do it. I have a different plan. Does that make sense? So this is where it gets hard. So we have to check in. We always have to be checking in. And so some examples of this is, so first of all, he could tell you to let them back in immediately to the same level of access, which is not the normal advice I would give somebody, okay? But full forgiveness, and he might say give full forgiveness and full immediate reconciliation. I think this is rare that he asks this of us, but God can bypass. So think David with Saul. Saul tried to kill him, and yet he kept going back and playing the harp for Saul for a time, right? Or he continued to give Saul chances in his life and to be in relationship with him. Hosea with Gomer, where he married the prostitute, right? And then she ran off from him and went back to prostitution. And then he said, okay, I want you to go take her back as your wife. What? Right? He asked him to give her full reconciliation, full access again. Think about Jesus with Peter after his denial. He denied the Lord. He's supposed to be one of the leaders, one of the top 3 leaders of the 12, completely denies Jesus in a moment of like, save my own skin. And Jesus gives him full restoration and, yep, you're still going to lead my church. Okay? So those are some examples of like full restoration immediately. Normally, it's more along the lines of this one, slowly let them earn access. Okay? So asking them to regain trust and prove change in order to get back to the same level of access that they had before. So somebody did an illustration of this one time where they had a full bowl of popcorn and an empty bowl. And they said, this is how you build trust. And they had a cup, and they scooped up popcorn and said, I am where I say I'm going to be. I do what I say I'm going to do. I'm earning trust right now, and I'm filling that bowl of trust. Now they broke trust, and she dumped out the whole bowl. And she put the cup down, and she grabbed like 3 kernels at a time and said, I am where I say I'm going to be. I do what I say I'm going to do. When I break trust, it rebuilds slower. Oop, I broke trust again. Dumps the whole bowl out, 1 kernel at a time. I am where I say I'm going to be. I am where I say I'm going to be. I do what I say I'm going to do. So every time trust is broken, it rebuilds slower, as it should be most of the time. Because as much as we're supposed to forgive everybody and love everybody as believers, that doesn't mean we're supposed to trust everybody. Okay? Trust usually is to be earned. And if they have proven themselves to be an untrustworthy person, it is wisdom to actually ask them to take the time to rebuild that trust in relationship with you. Okay? So that's a normal principle of rebuilding trust. Now, the Lord's not always normal. He doesn't always do it normal. Okay? So a third example is what I call just a shifted boundary, where they have broken trust enough or seriously enough or enough times that they no longer get the same access. And it won't change. Like, it's either a permanent change or pretty semi-permanent unless there's some significant change on their part. So these are more serious offenses or just God's guidance where he's telling you, you need to personally move this person to a different level of access. It might be none, or it might simply be out a few circles. Okay, they're no longer your closest friend. They're out here in acquaintance land or something like that. Does that make sense? Okay. And again, I can always be kind to people, but that doesn't mean I have to give people access to my life. I had a situation with a person years and years ago at a church where it was mostly a giving relationship. I was completely aware it was a giving relationship. And it was bordering on almost unhealthy because I was still young and figuring out boundaries. And I eventually backed away because I was in a season where I had nothing to give. I was going through something. And so I just went, like, she tried to reach out and get, and I just went, whew, I can't right now, right? So I backed away. It immediately fizzled because it was only a giving relationship, right? She didn't have anything to give me. And I ran into her a few years later at some public place, and I saw her, and I kind of went, ooh, boy, right? You ever had that moment? And she walked over, and I purposely didn't even stand up to greet her. I was kind, but I was very firm in that it was very small talk, okay? Socially, small talk. I would not go any deeper than that. She read my body language very quickly, and she left, and there was no further contact, okay? And that was a very strong boundary for me. Like, you do not get access back into my life, okay? So these situations are tricky. You really need the wisdom of God to navigate each situation individually. Try really, really hard not to formalize in this realm, but always check in with Jesus. Think like Abraham. We need to hear and continue to hear. Okay? Abraham heard, go sacrifice your son. What? Right? And God asked Abraham to go sacrifice his son, and apparently the word was not about the end result so much as it was about what was happening in Abraham's heart as he walked through that process. And thank goodness Abraham was still willing to be hearing, because then the Lord changed and said, stop. And Abraham heard it and obeyed. Okay? And so I call it the boomerang effect. Like, where the Lord sends you this direction. And so you think, well, obviously I must be going this direction for that end result. But he's throwing you this way so you'll end up over here, which makes total sense. Okay? Only in the land of boomerangs, all right? And so I have tried to learn in my mind to go, okay, I think I'm headed this direction, but I'm going to leave the possibility open that the Lord's going to do a and I'm going to end up over here. Okay? And same in relationships. Sometimes you'll think you're headed in this direction, but then the Lord's going to change the trajectory quickly. And so just be open to that. So maybe you hear, end it in the relationship. And in the process of trying to do that, it actually sparks reconciliation. Okay? You have to be open to hear and continuing to hear, because the Lord may change it. And so you got to stay open to that. So as you process through these three questions, relationship, am I supposed to be in a relationship with them? What type of relationship is it? What level of access should I be giving them in this season? Stay open to taking time to pray through it carefully. These are not decisions you want to make quickly. Now, sometimes the Lord will download it quickly, but be really prayerful about taking time in these decisions. Relationships are so precious. okay? And connections with other people, like other people is about the only thing we can take to heaven with us. Does that make sense? And so relationships are bridges to other people where you get to feed into their life or they get to feed into yours. Don't take lightly whether you have it or whether you don't, because those are really, really weighty things in the kingdom, okay? Stay open to mentors, to counselors helping you process through these things, because our own hurts, our own wounds, our own triggers can get in the way as we're trying to make these decisions, okay? So, but when you get wisdom and advice from other people, you always need to take it to the Lord, because again, it could be a great principle they're telling you, and 95% of people are telling you to do that, but the Lord's telling you to do a Hosea and Gomer, right? And so you got to be open to that. His advice often confounds normal wisdom. So stay loving, stay kind, stay powerful in your relationships. This really honors God and it honors the kingdom. And know that having healthy boundaries and not giving everybody the same access to your life is a godly principle as well. And I think we kind of forget that as Christians sometimes. We just think we should have full forgiveness, full reconciliation. And that's really not wisdom. It's not wise. It's not powerful as a kingdom person. And so we need to honor the Lord both when we stay in relationship with somebody and when he asks us to end a relationship with somebody or back out to a different level. Okay? So I want to open it up if anybody has questions right now, if you want to just kind of talk through some stuff. Any questions that kind of came up from that or processing? Okay. Yeah, it's Keep Your Love On by Danny Silk. Basically, everything he writes is amazing, so just go buy them all. He has really, really good, he's a great teacher. He just is really good at communicating, making things simple and accessible for the average person. So, and he's had a lot of, oh, there we go. He's had a lot of experience with dysfunctional relationships and very functional relationships, because his marriage was super duper difficult for the first like 17 years. I think they said it was practically hell. Like they're complete opposite personalities. And then he and his wife did foster care for many, many years with really, really difficult kids. So he's experienced a lot of relational difficulty and writes from a very personal place in that. Yeah. Any other questions or processing? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's wisdom. Yeah, so the question is, there's a severed relationship, people would ask why, and you just wouldn't give them an answer, because it's really none of their business. Yeah, that's difficult, especially if it looks like we're the bad person, right? But I think that's wisdom, unless the Lord says it's a safe person that you can process that with. I think that's usually wisdom. Yeah. Yeah, it's not, trying not to gossip. Yep. Mm-hmm. And I find the Lord will say it's okay to process it with my inner, like my mentors, my safe people that are going to hold that confidence so that I can verbally process, right? But beyond that, it's usually walking into gossip and slander a little bit, right? Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Or like you've worked with somebody who's going through something and it's complicated, right? We've probably all worked with people. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. And I'll often check in with the Lord before I share something, even with a close person. I'm kind of like, is this okay, Jesus, for me to process this? And I'll often get yes, or sometimes I'll get a check in my, I'll even open my mouth to share something, and then it's like, I get this check in my spirit, and I'm like, okie dokie. Changing subject, right? And so just being, that's a good example of hearing and continuing to hear. Where normally it would be, I assume when I tell a married person something that they will tell their spouse everything. Not saying they will, but I just assume there's total openness in a marriage and that I'm totally fine with like that other person, as long as it's a healthy whatever. Unless I particularly tell that person, like, please don't tell your spouse this, you know, that's just open game because that's their spouse. That's their processing person, right? So, any other thoughts or questions on this topic? Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We're going to close it for now, and then we'll move into networking time, okay?